Deputy Miller thought he was untouchable. He planted drugs on a Marine's widow and gave her 48 hours to leave the county or he'd take her kids. He was a predator and she was the perfect prey. But he didn't know that her 12-year-old son had already asked a Hell's Angel for protection. Miller thought he was running a scared woman out of town. He was about to find out he'd declared war on a 1,000-man army that was already on its way to burn his corrupt world to the ground. Before we dive deeper into story, a story that will shake your faith in the system but restore it in humanity, I need to know, where are you watching this from? What corner of the world are you in right now? Drop your city and your country in the comments below. Let's see how far this beacon of hope can truly travel. Your voice matters. Help us get this channel to 1,000 subscribers. God bless you for joining the family. This, you see, is a story about the American dream turned inside out. It begins not with hope, but with an ending. Sarah Jensen was a widow before she was 30. Her husband, a Marine, had come home from Afghanistan, but a part of him never left the wire. He traded one war for another and lost the second one, leaving Sarah with 2 small children and a folded flag. The insurance money was just enough to run. She fled Chicago, not for a better life, but for a cheaper one, hoping the flat, quiet expanse of the Rust Belt would offer some kind of peace. She landed in Warren County, Ohio, a place where the factories were skeletons and the hope had rusted shut. Her new home, the Oakwood Trailer Park, a gravel lot on the edge of town where the forgotten live. And then there is Elijah. He's 12, but he looks at the world through the ancient, weary eyes of a man who has seen too much. He is the new man of the house, a title that sits on his small shoulders like a lead-lined vest. He doesn't play, he watches. He carries his father's bronze service medal in the pocket of his faded jeans, the medal worn smooth, a talisman he rubs when the fear gets too close. He is fiercely, silently protective of his younger sister. He is her shield. Underscore, before we dive any deeper into this family's fight, I have to know, where are you watching this story unfold? Drop your city, your state, or your country in the comments below. Let us know you're part of this journey. Underscore, if Elijah is the shield, 7-year-old Maya is the last flicker of light he's trying to protect. She is all that is. Left of the before, a fragile, gentle soul who still believes the world is inherently good. A faith that is both beautiful and terrifyingly naive. Her anchor in this storm is Captain Whiskers, a threadbare, one-eyed stuffed rabbit that her father won for her at a county fair ages ago. She whispers her secrets into its matted fur, clutches it when the trailer groans in the Ohio wind, and believes with all her heart that as long as she has Captain Whiskers, everything will be okay. She is the innocence the world is trying to crush. Their home, this trailer, is a tin can on cinder blocks, weeping rust stains down its aluminum siding. It's the only place in the county that would rent to Sarah with her spotty employment history and no security deposit. The wind whistles through the window seals. The plumbing groans. The floorboards sag. Sarah scrubs the thin linoleum raw, fighting a losing battle against the damp and the smell of mildew, trying to force this place to be a home. But it's not a home. It's a holding cell. It's the physical manifestation of their isolation, a place where no one visits and no one helps. Warren County, Ohio, is not a postcard. It's a ghost. The main street is a gap-toothed row of boarded-up storefronts, casualties of a prosperity that packed up and left 20 years ago. The only thriving businesses are the pawn shop and the Crossroads Diner, a 24-hour beacon of stale coffee and fluorescent lighting. This diner is the town's central nervous system, the place where gossip is the main currency and where everyone knows everyone's business. And the business they all knew was that Sarah and her kids were outsiders. They were city folk. They were other, and in a town this small and this wounded, different is dangerous. But this family, they are pure. Despite the hunger, despite the cold, despite the sideways glances, they have a core of decency that the rust hasn't touched. Sarah works double shifts at the diner, her feet aching, forcing a smile for customers who tip poorly and treat her like furniture. She apologizes when they are rude. Elijah, though hardened, is gentle. He finds loose change on the sidewalk and puts it in the VFW donation jar by the diner's register. He walks Maya to the library every day, reading her stories of knights and dragons, trying to build a fortress of normalcy around her. The pressure, however, was building. The local kids, sensing the lack of a father, the lack of a protector, had begun to circle. It started as it always does, whispers and names. Trailer trash, orphans. They'd follow Elijah and Maya home from the bus stop, mimicking their city accents. Elijah taught Maya to ignore them, to walk faster, to keep her eyes forward. He absorbed the shoves in the hallway, his jaw tight, his hand gripping the metal in his pocket. He refused to fight back. He knew instinctively that any trouble, any call to the police would be blamed on them and would jeopardize the fragile roof over their head. And in this town there was a shadow, a shadow that wore a badge and drove a county cruiser. Deputy Miller, he was the sheriff's nephew, a small man inflated by the small power he wielded. He considered the poor side of town, specifically the Oakwood Trailer Park, his personal fiefdom. He knew every resident's weakness, and he saw Sarah Jensen's vulnerability, her solitude, her desperation, her out-of-state plates, not as something to protect, but as something to be exploited. He'd park his cruiser at the entrance to the park and just watch her. He'd pull her over for a cracked taillight that was perfectly fine. He was a predator, enjoying the slow squeeze. Sarah had no one. It was an island of grief in an ocean of indifference. The other trailer park residents were too beaten down by their own lives, too afraid of Deputy Miller to offer so much as a kind word. The school principal had dismissed her concerns about the bullying. The system was a closed door. The money was running out. Sarah started skipping meals, telling the kids she ate at the diner, just so Elijah and Maya could have the last of the boxed macaroni and cheese. They were utterly, completely, and profoundly alone. Good people backed into a corner by a world that didn't care. This is the breaking point. This is where the story truly begins. Not with a gunshot, but with the quiet, suffocating pressure of a system designed to crush the forgotten. Sarah. Elijah and Maya weren't just poor. They were invisible. They were the people who fall through the cracks. The ones the authorities are supposed to protect, but instead exploit. They were a military family, abandoned by the very country their father died for, stranded in a forgotten county in Ohio. They were holding on by a single frayed thread, and that thread was about to be cut. But what the town didn't know, what Miller couldn't possibly understand, was that Maya's pure heart was about to light a fuse. The cold Ohio autumn was tightening its grip. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the sky a flat, unforgiving gray, the kind of gray that sinks into your bones. Elijah and Maya were walking the gravel path from the public library, a route they took every day. But this time they weren't alone. Deputy Miller's son, a mean-spirited 15-year-old named Kyle, had gathered his crew. They had been waiting. They stepped out from behind the rusted dumpster of the Crossroads Diner, cutting off the path back to the trailer park. It was an ambush. Kyle smirked, his father's casual cruelty perfectly mirrored on his teenage face. "Look what we got here," he sneered. "The trailer park orphans." Elijah immediately stepped in front of Maya, his small body a rigid line of defiance. "Leave us alone, Kyle," he said, his voice trying for a strength he didn't feel. The taunts escalated. They shoved Elijah hard, sending him stumbling back. Maya let out a terrified whimper, which only fueled their cruelty. Kyle snatched at her, not to hit her, but to grab her treasure. He ripped Captain Whiskers from her arms, the one-eyed rabbit a symbol of her last shred of security. "What's this, baby?" he mocked, dangling it by one ear. "Gonna cry?" Maya's face crumpled, a silent scream of utter despair as Kyle threw the rabbit into a puddle of greasy mud, and that's when they saw him, or rather, felt him. At the dark end of the alleyway, obscured in the shadows by the diner's overflowing garbage, a shape was working on a machine. It was a mountain, a man so large he seemed to block out what little light remained. He was draped in weathered leather, his back to them, revealing a patch that struck fear into the heart of every law-abiding citizen, the unmistakable, terrifying death's head of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. His hair was a long, steel-gray ponytail. His arms, visible as he worked, were a tapestry of ink, a life story written in green and blue tattoos. This was Preacher. He wasn't a local. He was a ghost, a legend from the road, a man who had earned his name not for his piety, but for the sermons he delivered with his fists. He was a Vietnam veteran, a tunnel rat, a man who had lived in the dark and was comfortable there. The air around him felt heavy, dangerous. He was the kind of man mothers tell their children to cross the street to avoid. He was the monster in the alley. The bullies hadn't seen him. They were too focused on Maya's tears, on their own petty power. Preacher heard the scuffle. He heard the girl's whimper. He paused, a wrench in his massive, grease-stained hand. He didn't turn around. He had seen the world's ugliness. He had participated in it. He usually kept his head down, minded his own business, and stayed loyal only to the patch on his back. This wasn't his fight. The world was full of bullies and victims. It was the natural, rotten order of things. He gave a final, angry twist to the bolt on his Harley's engine. He was just passing through Warren County, a quick stop for parts before heading to the charter in Cleveland. But then the choice was made. Elijah, seeing his sister's world shatter as her rabbit hit the mud, felt something snap. He was terrified of the bullies, yes, but the man in the alley... He was an unknown, a void, trapped between the immediate, sneering cruelty of Kyle Miller and the silent, massive menace of the biker. Elijah made a split-second calculation. He had one chance. He grabbed Maya's small hand, his own trembling violently. He didn't run away. He ran toward the monster. He ran straight for the towering figure in the Hells Angels colors. He didn't scream for the police. He didn't cry for his mom. He ran and slammed his small 90-pound body directly into the back of Preacher's leg, clinging to the thick leather like a drowning sailor grabbing a rusty anchor. Preacher froze. the wrench clattering to the pavement. The sheer impact, the desperation of it stunned him. He slowly turned, his face a mask of road-worn granite, his eyes deep-set and cold, and looked down. He saw two children, their faces pale and streaked with tears, looking up at him with an expression of absolute primal terror. And they weren't terrified of _him_. They were terrified of what was behind him. Then came the words that changed everything. Elijah didn't even know what he was saying. The plea ripped from his soul. He just looked up at this giant, tattooed stranger, the most frightening man he had ever seen, and delivered the title of the story. His voice was a raw whisper, cracking with fear. "Please, hide us. We're scared." He wasn't asking for a fight. He wasn't asking for justice. He was asking for sanctuary. He was a 12-year-old boy appealing to the last possible refuge in a world that had offered him none. Preacher stared at them. Time stopped. The alley grew silent. The bullies, finally noticing, took a few steps back, their smirks faltering. Preacher looked from the terrified children clinging to his leg to the muddy, discarded rabbit. And then, slowly, he raised his eyes to Kyle Miller and his crew. He saw them for exactly what they were: weak, pathetic, and cruel. They were the jackals he had spent his life fighting, and sometimes becoming the wolves. But this this was different. This was a child, the son of a soldier by the look of his ramrod straight posture, asking for protection. In that single crystallized moment, something ancient and forgotten inside Preacher clicked into place. A code, a debt. He had seen this kind of fear before in the villages of Southeast Asia, in the eyes of innocents caught in a war they didn't start. And here it was again, in a forgotten alley in Ohio. This small boy hadn't run from him. He had run to him. He had looked at a Hell's Angel, a man society labeled a pariah, an outlaw, a criminal, and seen a protector. This one act of blind, desperate faith was a purer gesture than Preacher had seen in 30 years. He didn't roar. He didn't threaten. He didn't even speak. The most terrifying thing he could do was move. Preacher unfolded to his full 6'5" height, a solid wall of leather and muscle. He took one deliberate step forward, planting himself between Elijah and Maya and the group of teenage bullies. He simply stood there. He crossed his arms, the tattoos on his biceps flexing. He was an immovable object, an unscalable wall. He didn't have to say a word. His presence was the message. Kyle Miller and his friends froze. All their pacanimal bravado evaporated instantly. This wasn't a scared woman or a quiet kid. This was a Hell's Angel . This was real, adult, and life-altering danger. They saw the patch. They saw the look in his eyes, a flat, cold emptiness that promised consequences they couldn't even imagine. Kyle, trying to save face, muttered a "whatever, freaks," but his voice cracked, and they backed away slowly, then turned and ran, scrambling over each other to get out of the alley. The silence that returned was different. It was heavy, but it was safe. Preacher stood there for a long moment, his back still to the children, making sure the cowards were truly gone. He listened to their footsteps fade. Only then did he relax his stance. He turned around, the menace evaporating from his features, replaced by a deep, profound weariness. He looked down at Elijah, who was still frozen, his hand locked on Maya's. The adrenaline was fading, leaving the boy shaking. Preacher's granite face didn't smile, but his eyes softened by a fraction. He took a deep breath, the smell of mud and garbage filling his lungs. He walked past the children, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. He bent down, a slow, painful movement for a man his age, his old wounds protesting. He reached his huge, tattooed hand, a hand scarred from wrenches and fights, into the filthy puddle. He retrieved Captain Whiskers. The rabbit was dripping with grime. He held it up, looking at it with a strange solemnity. He used the relatively clean sleeve of his leather jacket to wipe off the worst of the mud. He walked back to Maya. She was hiding behind Elijah's legs, peeking out with wide, wet eyes. Preacher knelt, a motion that looked unnatural for his massive frame, bringing himself down to her level. He didn't loom. He presented himself. He held out the damp, one-eyed rabbit. Maya hesitated, then slowly, her tiny, trembling hand reached out and took her treasure back. She clutched it to her chest, burying her face in its damp fur. It was the first time she had felt safe all day. Preacher looked at Elijah. He saw the boy's jaw set in that protective clench. He saw the father's service medal hanging from a small chain the boy had pulled from his pocket. Preacher's eyes locked onto it. He recognized the campaign star. He slowly raised his own hand and gave the boy a short, sharp nod of respect. Not a nod to a child, but a nod from one soldier to the son of another. It was a silent acknowledgement. I see you. I see your burden. I see your father. He stood up, his joints popping. You kids live close? His voice was a low rumble, like gravel pouring into a barrel. Elijah, still speechless, just pointed in the direction of the Oakwood trailer park. Preacher grunted. He wheeled his bike out of the alley, the heavy machine clicking and groaning. He didn't start the engine. He knew the sound would terrify them. Instead, he walked the massive Harley-Davidson, pushing it alongside them. He didn't say another word. He just walked them home. a silent, leather-clad giant escorting two small, stunned children, ensuring the jackals stayed in the shadows. Humiliation is a powerful accelerant. Kyle Miller did not run home crying. He ran home spitting with a rage he inherited directly from his father. He burst into his house, slamming the door, and told his dad a story. It was a liar's story, of course. He painted himself as the victim, harassed by the trailer trash kids and then impossibly threatened by a biker freak who pulled a knife. He knew the right buttons to push. He knew his father's pride, his fragile authority, and his deep-seated hatred for anyone who didn't fit into his narrow, rusted-shut worldview. He didn't just poke the bear. He handed it a weapon. Deputy Miller's face went pale, then a dark, mottled red. This was not about his son's safety. He knew his son was lying. He didn't care. This was about _control_, a Hell's Angel, an outlaw, a piece of leather-clad garbage had dared to intervene in _his_town on _his_ turf to protect the very people Miller had marked as his own. It was a challenge to his power. It was an insult to the badge. That out-of-town trash Sarah and her orphan kids were _his_ to squeeze, and this biker, this _nothing_ had stepped on his claim. Oh no, this would not stand. He wasn't just going to punish the biker. The biker was a ghost. Probably long gone, riding down I-75. No, you punish a ghost by hurting what it tried to protect. He was going to wipe this family off his map. He was going to use the full crushing weight of his authority to annihilate them. He was going to make an example of Sarah Jensen, one so brutal that no one not a resident, and certainly not a passing outlaw would ever think to defy him again. He smiled, a thin, cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. He knew exactly how to do it. It was time to deploy the worst. That night, long after the moon was high and the decent folks of Warren County were asleep, Miller's cruiser glided into the Oakwood trailer park. He cut the headlights, rolling in the dark, the gravel crunching softly under his tires. He parked 2 rows over from Sarah's trailer. He was a predator, and this was his hunting ground. He put on a pair of black leather gloves. From his special toolkit under the passenger seat, he pulled a small, clear plastic baggie. Inside was a dusting of white, powder and a few crystalline shards. A throwaway bag he'd kept from a previous bus just for opportunities like this. He moved silently through the shadows. The trailer park was dead quiet, save for the hum of a failing transformer. Sarah's trailer was dark, a dim nightlight glowing in Maya's window. He went to the small, rusted tin shed behind their unit where Sarah kept a broken lawnmower and some empty boxes. The lock was a joke. He snapped it with a small pair of bolt cutters. Didn't just toss the baggie inside. He was meticulous. He opened a damp cardboard box of old clothes, tucked the drugs deep inside a moldy sweater, and then tossed the box onto the floor, making it look like a sloppy, desperate hiding place. So he walked back to his cruiser, took off the gloves, and picked up his radio. He called it in. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I'm at the Oakwood trailer park. Got an anonymous tip about suspicious activity, possible narcotics distribution behind Unit 12. That's the Jensen residence. I'm going to check it out." The anonymous tip was his own fabrication, a necessary piece of paperwork to justify the search. Now it was all official. Now he was covered. He clicked on his heavy-duty maglite, the beam cutting a perfect, terrifying circle in the dark. He walked to Sarah's door. The knock was not a request. It was a cannon shot. _bam-bam dav from _sheriff's department. Open the door. Sarah jolted awake, her heart instantly in her throat. She stumbled out of her small bedroom, pulling on a robe, her mind racing. The rent? The kids? She saw Elijah and Maya huddled in their doorway, pale and terrified. She opened the door, her hands shaking. There was Miller, his flashlight beam aimed right at her eyes, blinding her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "Got a call about some activity around your property. You mind if I take a look around your shed?" He didn't wait for an answer. He pushed past her, his boots stepping on the welcome mat her husband had given her. "You kids stay inside." He walked to the shed, Sarah following him, barefoot on the cold, damp ground, her robe clutched tight. "What is this? I don't understand." Double, she stammered. Miller shone his light into the shed, immediately finding the disturbed box. He kicked it. Well, he said, feigning surprise. He reached in and pulled out the baggie. He held it up to the light, dangling it in front of her face. "Ma'am, you got a real problem. Here." Sarah's world dissolved. "What? No, that's not mine. I've never seen that. Someone put it there," she pleaded, the words catching in her throat, raw panic rising. Miller just shook his head, a look of profound, practiced disappointment on his face. "That's what they all say, Sarah. That's what they all say." He clicked his tongue. "Possession of a controlled substance. Looks like methamphetamine to me. That's a felony. And with kids in the house, that's a whole other level of trouble. Child Protective Services. They don't take kindly to this." This was it. The worst. The one word that shatters a parent's soul. CPS. He had her. He knew it. I'll be arrested?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Miller sighed. pretending to be a man wrestling with a difficult decision. Look, I'm not a bad guy. I see you're struggling. I see these kids. He put the baggie in his pocket. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to forget. I found this for now. And you're going to pack your bags, you and your kids, and you're going to be out of Warren County. I give you 48 hours. If I see your car, your kids, or you in this county after 10 a.m. Saturday, I'm booking. And your kids, he leaned in closer, go straight into the system. Do you understand me? Sarah could only nod. A terrible choking sob trapped in her chest. This was the checkmate. He hadn't just threatened her. He had threatened the annihilation of her family. He had used the very system meant to protect children as the weapon to destroy them. Yes, she whispered. Good, Miller said. He smiled, that cold, dead smile. You have a nice trip now. He tipped his hat and walked away, whistling softly, leaving Sarah to collapse on the gravel, the 48-hour clock ticking like a bomb in her ears. The next morning, Sarah was a ghost. She hadn't slept. She had sat on her linoleum floor, staring at the wall until the sun came up. She had no money, no family to run to, no home. Leaving the county meant living in her rusted-out 1998 sedan, a car that probably wouldn't make it to the Ohio border, but staying meant losing Elijah and Maya. She had one last desperate idea. Miller was the deputy, but he wasn't the sheriff. The sheriff was his uncle, an older man. Maybe he didn't know what his nephew was doing. Maybe, just maybe, he was a real cop. She scraped together her last few dollars, put gas in the car, and drove to the Warren County Sheriff's Department, in the center of town. It was a small brick building, an American flag flapping lazily out front. She walked in, Maya's hand in hers, Elijah's hand gripping the back of her shirt. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic indifference. The sheriff, a heavy-set man with a face like a worn-out boot, listened to her story. He leaned back in his squeaking chair, picking at his teeth with a paperclip. He listened to her account of the bullying, of Miller's harassment, of the planted drugs. When she finished, breathless and crying, the sheriff was silent for a long moment. He tossed the paperclip on his desk. Ma'am, he said, his voice a gravelly monotone. That's a hell of an accusation to make against a decorated officer, my nephew. He looked at Elijah. I hear your boy got into it with some local kids. Boys will be boys, you know. Sometimes you gotta learn to take a lump. He stood up, a clear dismissal. He walked her to the door. Sounds to me like you're just not a good fit for our town, Mrs. Jensen. You're sensitive. Sarah looked at him, her last shred of hope dying. He planted drugs on me. He's giving me 48 hours to leave, she said, her voice rising. The sheriff's folksy demeanor vanished. His eyes went flat and hard as iron. Then I suggest you take his advice. My hands are tied. It's his word against yours. And you're at well, you're you, and he's law enforcement. He held the door open for her. If you don't like how we run things here in Warren County, the I-75 runs north and south. I suggest you pick a direction. The system had not just failed. The system was the trap. The police were not the protectors. They were the predators. The sheriff's office wasn't a sanctuary. It was the dragon's lair. She walked out into the cold sunlight, completely and utterly broken. There was no one to call, no one to help. The law itself was the weapon being used to destroy her. She was a widow of a U.S. Marine, and her own country, in the form of a county badge, had just declared her an enemy. She drove back to the trailer, her children silent in the back seat, the ticking clock the only sound in the car. But Miller made a mistake, and the sheriff made a mistake. They assumed no one was watching. They assumed Sarah was invisible. They didn't know about Preacher. The biker hadn't left town. His code, that old ironclad thing he lived by, wouldn't let him. He had spent the night in the parking lot of the local VFW hall, a place he was welcome as a veteran, a place that was sacred ground. He had a clear view of the trailer park entrance from the back lot. He had seen Miller's cruiser slide in without its lights. He had seen it park. He had seen it leave. An hour later, he didn't need to be inside the trailer. He knew that script by heart. He'd seen it in backwater towns all across America. A badge-heavy cop, a vulnerable target, a late-night visit. It was the classic squeeze. And then this morning he saw Sarah's car, loaded with her kids, drive to the sheriff's office. He saw her walk in, desperate, and he saw her walk out, destroyed. That was all the confirmation he needed. The system wasn't just broken, it was corrupt. The safe institutions were a lie. He knew what that look on her face meant. It meant she had 48 hours. It meant she was beaten. Preacher watched her drive away, and a cold, controlled fury settled over him. He wasn't a good man, not by society's standards, but he was a man of honor, and he owed a debt. Not to Sarah, but to the small boy who had looked at a Hell's Angel and seen a savior. He walked into the VFW hall, the smell of stale beer and old cigarettes hitting him. He nodded to the bartender, went to the payphone in the back, and dropped in a quarter. He dialed a number from memory. It was answered on the first ring. It was his chapter president. Preacher didn't mince words. "It's Preacher. I'm in Warren County, Ohio. They're trying to take us soldiers. Kids, a local deputy, it's rotten." He gave the widow 48 hours. He listened. He described the badge, the threat, the innocence. The president on the other end was silent for a moment, and then he said one single guttural word: "Come, Saturday morning, 9:55 a.m., the deadline." The 48-hour clock was all but dead. The air in the Oakwood trailer park was thick with a damp, cold misery. Sarah was defeated. She was numbly stuffing a few plastic garbage bags with clothes, the meager sum of their existence. She was putting them in the trunk of her rusted sedan, a car that was itself a prayer. Elijah was silent, his face a mask of old-age stoicism, his hand clutching the service medal in his pocket. Maya sat on the trailer's cracked vinyl steps, clutching Captain Whiskers, her eyes wide and vacant. They weren't just being evicted, they were being erased. The system had won, the bad men had won, and right on cue, the victor arrived. Deputy Miller's cruiser didn't speed. It glided. It rolled slowly down the gravel lane, a shark savoring the blood in the water. He parked directly in front of their trailer, blocking them in. He got out, not with aggression, but with a sickening, leisurely arrogance. He adjusted his heavy utility belt. He put on his mirrored sunglasses, though the sun was hidden behind a wall of gray clouds. He looked at Sarah, at her bags, at her broken-down car, and a thin, cruel smile played on his lips. He was here to enjoy his work. He was here to watch them break. He took his first step toward the trailer, his boot crunching on the gravel, and then he paused. He cocked his head. A sound, a faint, distant hum, so low it was almost a vibration rather than a noise. He scowled, annoyed by the interruption. He glanced toward the I-75 interstate, assuming it was a convoy of semi-trucks. It was nothing, just the world moving on, indifferent to the small, pathetic drama he was directing. He took another step, raising his hand to wrap his baton on Sarah's door to deliver the final crushing blow. But the sound didn't fade. It grew. The hum became a growl. The growl became a rumble. This wasn't a truck. This wasn't underscore on underscore the highway. This was underscore coming underscore from the highway underscore exiting underscore onto their county road. The coffee Miller had left on his dashboard began to ripple. A loose pebble on the ground next to his boot vibrated. Sarah felt it in the floor of the trailer. Elijah felt it in his chest. It was a deep, guttural, angry pulse. It was the sound of 1,000 lions waking. It was the sound of the horizon itself, angry and approaching. Miller's smirk vanished. He took off his sunglasses, his eyes wide, his animal brain screaming that something underscore wrong underscore was happening. The rumble was now a physical force. It was a rolling, seismic event. The windows of the trailers in Oakwood Park were rattling in their frames. It was the sound of underscore thunder underscore. Not the thunder of a storm, but the deep, mechanical, synchronous thunder of internal combustion. It was the sound of judgment. It was the sound of a promise being kept. Miller was no longer looking at Sarah. He was staring, mesmerized, at the single access road that led into this forgotten part of the county. And then they came. Over the small rise, a single headlight appeared. Then 2, then 10, then 50. They were not a group. They were a underscore flood underscore. A churning, unstoppable river of polished chrome, black steel, and weathered leather. They poured off the exit, a living, breathing entity of men and machines. The sound was deafening. A symphony of Harley-Davidson Vitwins that sounded like God himself was revving an engine. The ground itself was underscore trembling underscore. This wasn't a protest. This was an occupation. This wasn't just a chapter. This was an army. From 5 different states, the charters had answered the call. From Pennsylvania, from Michigan, from Indiana, from Kentucky, and from all across Ohio, they had ridden all night. 1_1,000 Hells Angels. They rode, 2 by 2, a column of leather and steel that stretched back for miles. A serpent of righteousness that had come to this small, corrupt town to find its prey. They were a force of nature, an Old Testament event. The local townspeople, hearing the roar, thought it was an earthquake or the end of the world. And at the very front, riding as if he were the embodiment of the entire storm, was Preacher. His face was a mask of cold, righteous granite. Out on his bike, not as a man, but as an icon. He was the pale rider. He saw Deputy Miller, frozen in the gravel driveway, his mouth open, his hand hovering uselessly near his sidearm. Preacher's eyes, flat and gray as the Ohio sky, locked onto Miller's. He didn't slow down. He didn't swerve. He just looked and in that look, Miller saw his entire petty, cruel life flash before his eyes. The town of Warren County simply ceased to function. At the Crossroads Diner, waitresses dropped plates. Customers ran to the windows, their phone held up, their faces pressed against the glass. On Main Street, the antique shop owner fumbled with his keys, locking his door. People peeked out from behind their curtains, their minds unable to process the scale of what they were seeing. This wasn't a biker gang. This was an invasion force. This was the apocalypse, dressed in leather, riding on chrome. They were terrified. And Deputy Miller, the predator, he became the prey. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. His knees were visibly knocking. His hand, the one that had held the planted drugs, the one that had gripped the baton, was shaking so violently he couldn't have drawn his weapon if he'd tried. He fumbled for the radio on his shoulder, but he couldn't form words. All the authority, all the power he'd stolen from the weak, all the fear he'd inspired, it was gone. In the face of this, his badge wasn't just tin, it was _nothing _. The lead bikes, Preacher among them, didn't stop at the trailer. For one wild, confusing second, Miller thought they might be ignoring him, but they weren't here for _him_. Not yet. They were here for the _source_, the head of the snake. The entire column, all 1,000 bikes, roared past the trailer park, their collective wind buffeting Miller and nearly knocking him off his feet. They were heading downtown. They were heading for the brick building with the American flag. They were going to the Warren County Sheriff's Department. They didn't park, they _besieged _. The river of steel split encircling the building. They filled Main Street curb to curb. They blocked the intersections. They formed a perfect, impenetrable, intimidating perimeter around the sheriff's office. It was a tactical, military-style occupation. No one was getting in. No one was getting out. The town was, in effect, captured. The bikers sat on their idling machines, a 1,000-man jury, their faces grim. The heart of Warren County's law and order was now surrounded by outlaws. Then Preacher, at the front steps, raised one gloved hand, and in a single, terrifying, unified moment, 1,000 engines were cut. The silence that fell was more profound, more deafening, more terrifying than the noise. It was an absolute void. It was the sound of a held breath. It was the sound of complete and total control. The only noise was the _click-clack of Preacher's heavy boots on the pavement as he dismounted and walked toward the glass doors of the station. Inside, Sheriff Miller's uncle was watching from his window. His face was ashen. His entire tiny kingdom of corruption, built on backroom deals and casual cruelty, was now surrounded by an _ocean of men who operated by a code he could not understand and could not intimidate. He saw men with Vietnam veteran patches. He saw men with filthy few patches. He saw men who had seen war, who had seen prison, and who, he knew with a sickening certainty, were not afraid of _him_. His power in this moment was revealed as a complete illusion. The Preacher did not walk in alone. This was not a mob. This was an execution. He was flanked. On his right were two men in perfectly tailored $1,000 suits. They carried briefcases. They were not bikers. They were the MC's retained lawyers from a powerhouse firm in Cleveland. On his left was a man he'd invited, an investigative reporter from the Columbus Dispatch a camera around his neck and a digital recorder already running. The MC didn't just bring the thunder, they brought the law. They walked through the front doors. The receptionist, a woman who usually snarled at the public, looked like she was about to faint. She didn't say a word. They walked directly into the sheriff's private office. The sheriff stood, knocking over his coffee cup. What is the meaning of this? This is ... This is intimidation. This is an occupation, he stammered, his voice cracking. Preacher stopped in front of his desk. He leaned forward, placing his massive gloved hands on the sheriff's blotter. We're here, Preacher rumbled, his voice low and cold, about a soldier's widow. We're here about your deputy. The lawyers stepped forward, opening their briefcases. This wasn't a threat. It was a decapitation. Sheriff, the lead lawyer began, his voice sharp and precise. We have here 4 affidavits from other residents of the Oakwood Trailer Park, detailing systematic harassment and extortion by Deputy Miller. He placed the file on the desk. We also have, he continued, security footage from 3 different businesses of Miller conducting illegal searches and shake. Our ... associates ... moved very quickly. The reporter's camera flashed, capturing the sheriff's panicked, sweaty face. And this right here is the moment the tables turn. This is when the system, so confident in its own corruption, gets punched in the mouth by a fistful of truth. If you believe that power should never be used to protect predators, if you believe that the corrupt deserve to be exposed no matter what uniform they wear, do me a favor. Smash that like button right now. Your engagement is a vote. It proves that people care more about real justice than they do about politics or a tin badge. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, we've just been on the phone with the Ohio Attorney General's office. They are deeply interested in the pattern of civil rights abuses in Warren County, as is the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force in Cincinnati. We faxed them our entire file an hour ago. They are sending a team. The lawyer smiled, a cold, sharp expression. They said to tell you, stay put. The sheriff looked at the files, he looked at the reporter, he looked at Preacher, and then he looked out the window at the 1,000 Hells Angels waiting patiently. The checkmate was total. There was no escape. There was no good boy call he could make. The MC hadn't just brought a mob. They had brought a mirror, and they were forcing the entire town to look at its own rotten reflection. The sheriff, breathing hard, his face a mask of sweat, slowly, agonizingly reached for his radio. He couldn't even look at Preacher. "Dispatch," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. Tell Deputy Miller to return to the station. Tell him to turn in his weapon and his badge." Miller's drive back to the station was the longest, loudest mile of his life. He had to navigate his cruiser through the narrow channel of leather, and steel that parted begrudgingly to let him pass. 1,000 men sitting on their silent bikes did not move. They did not threaten. They did not speak. They just watched. Their eyes, hidden behind mirrored sunglasses, or hardened by 10,000 miles of road, were a collective weight that pressed the very air out of his lungs. He was no longer a cop. He was a bug under a magnifying glass. By the time he parked his cruiser, his uniform, once a symbol of his power, was soaked in cold, terrified sweat. He wasn't a predator anymore. He was just meat. He stumbled into the station, his legs shaking, his authority stripped bare. The scene inside was surreal. Preacher, the giant biker, stood in the center of the room like a statue of judgment. The fancy-suited lawyers from Cleveland were calmly packing their briefcases, their work already done. The reporter from the _dispatch_ was snapping photos, capturing his humiliation for the front page. And his uncle, the sheriff, sat at his own desk, his head buried in his hands, a fat, broken man. "Your badge, Miller, and your weapon," the sheriff whispered, not even looking up. Miller fumbled with the clasp, his fingers numb. The tin badge clattered onto the desk. It was over. Outside, Preacher emerged from the station. He walked down the steps. He looked at the sea of his brothers, this army that had answered his call. He raised one gloved hand, not in victory, but in simple command. A new sound rumbled through the crowd, not of engines, but of 1,000 men speaking at once, a low, organized hum. The siege was over. The reconstruction was beginning. To the park was the only order given. The engines roared back to life, 1,000 thunderclaps in perfect, terrifying unison. The town's residents, who had been holding their collective breath, watched in stunned silence as the army of bikers turned their machines and thundered back toward the forgotten side of town. Sarah, Elijah, and Maya heard it. The thunder was returning. It was on their road. Sarah grabbed her children, pulling them behind her, her heart seizing. This was it. Miller was gone, but now they were coming for them. She braced herself, standing in the doorway of her broken-down trailer, a mother lion with no claws, ready to fight a hopeless battle. The bikes poured into the park, but they didn't circle. They didn't threaten. They parked. In neat, orderly military rows, they filled every gravel space. 1,000 men got off their bikes. And then they pulled out tool belts. They pulled out hammers. Preacher dismounted and walked directly to Sarah. He stopped 10 feet away, a respectful distance. He removed his sunglasses. His eyes, which she remembered as cold, were not. They were ... kind. "Ma'am," he rumbled. "It's done. Deputy Miller has been relieved of his duties. He's in the custody of the state police, who are on their way." He motioned back toward the center of town. "The sheriff is cooperating fully with an FBI investigation. This town's problems are just beginning." He paused, letting it sink in. "But yours ... yours are over. You ain't gotta run. You're safe." Sarah's legs gave out and she sank to her knees on the gravel, a sound of pure, agonizing relief tearing from her throat. Preacher didn't move to help her. He let her have the moment. He just turned and gave a short nod to his men, and the work began. It was a miracle of logistics. These were not thugs. These were union carpenters, master, electricians, plumbers, and roofers. These were combat engineers, veterans who had rebuilt entire bases in Fallujah and Afghanistan. This flimsy, rotting trailer was nothing. They swarmed it like ants, but with the precision of a special forces unit. They weren't just patching it. They were rebuilding it. It's the air filled with the sound of 100 hammers, a dozen saws, and the coordinated shouts of men working with a single, powerful purpose. In 3 hours, the trailer was unrecognizable. The leaking, rusted tin roof was stripped and replaced with new, weatherproof shingles. The sagging, moldy floorboards were ripped out and replaced with solid, sealed plywood. A team of electricians rewired the entire unit, replacing the faulty, sparking breaker box with a new one. They fixed the groaning plumbing. They installed a new water heater. They replaced the cracked, drafty windows. They didn't just fix what was broken. They made it new. They made it strong. They were quite literally rebuilding the home that Miller had tried to tear down nail by nail, and it didn't stop there. A U-Haul truck, borrowed by the MC from a local rental, backed up. It wasn't full of tools. It was full of groceries. They formed a human chain, passing boxes and bags into the trailer. They filled her empty pantry. They filled her empty fridge. Milk, eggs, cheese, fresh meat, vegetables, bread, cans of soup, bags of rice, boxes of cereal. Enough food for 6 months. A man from the Cleveland Charter, an accountant in his day life, walked to the stunned park manager. He paid Sarah's lot rent in cash. For 1 full year, the debt was erased. The work was done. The men were packing their tools, the sun beginning to dip. Preacher walked back to his bike. He pulled a small, carefully folded package from his saddlebag. He walked over to Elijah, who had been watching this entire miracle, his eyes wide, his hand still gripping his father's metal. Preacher knelt, wincing, bringing himself down to the boy's level. "Your father was a Marine," he stated. "It wasn't a question. He was a good man. He'd be proud of you. You protected your sister. You were brave when it mattered." He handed the package to the boy. It was a child-sized, brand-new black leather vest. Elijah unfolded it. The leather was new and stiff. It was clean, almost. On the chest, right over the heart, was a single custom-embroidered patch, the gold and scarlet insignia of his father's Marine Corps regiment. And on the back, in bold, white letters, was a single, powerful patch that read, "Family." Preacher tapped the vest. "This, this is just leather. But underscore this underscore." He pointed to the patch. "This is a promise. You ever feel scared again, you know who to call. You're one of us now. You're our blood." Elijah, the boy who never cried, the boy who carried the weight of his whole world, finally broke. He threw his arms around the giant biker's neck and wept. "This right here is what honor looks like. It's not a speech from a politician. It's not a policy written by some faceless bureaucrat. It's _action _." The United States of America had asked Sarah's husband to make the ultimate sacrifice, and when he did, the system forgot him. It let his family fall through the cracks, to be preyed upon by the very parasites it was supposed to police. It took an outlaw club, a brotherhood of veterans and forgotten sons, to ride 1,000 miles to remind Warren County what a _debt truly means. They weren't criminals. They were the bill, finally come to be collected. As the Ohio sky turned a deep, bruised purple, the thunder returned one last time. The 1,000 bikes, their work done, fired up. They didn't wait for thanks. They didn't pose for pictures. They had delivered their message. Quote, "They just left, a river of steel and taillights flowing back to the highway, disappearing as mythically as they had arrived. They left behind a safe family, a full pantry, and a small boy, in a new leather vest, finally standing guard over a home that was truly a home." Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather and ride steel. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that there are still armies of angels in this world, and they will show up when you call.